It's 10:02. Good morning. Welcome again. Thanks for joining us for this virtual policy update on both the continued availability of federal funding for FYI or FUP vouchers for youth and as well as new federal policies on the program. My name is Simone Turek-Lee, and I'm the Director of Housing and Economic Mobility here at John Burton Advocates for Youth. And just for those who may be a little bit newer to this topic, FYI stands for Foster Youth to Independence, and FUP stands for Family Unification Program. And as you'll hear from presenters today, this is really a homelessness prevention program for youth transitioning from or formerly in the foster care system or out of home juvenile probation. And despite significant proposed cuts and changes being made at the federal level, it's important that people know that this program remains available and that there's in fact support for it under the current federal administration. So that's really the main focus of today's webinar. And we'll hear more about that in just a moment. We invite you to submit questions through the question and answer box at any point during the webinar. We will have a Q&A at the end, and we'll be recording today's webinar and sending it to all of everyone who registered later this afternoon. And we'll send the recording and the slide deck. They'll also both be posted on our website. All right. So today's agenda. So we'll do introductions in a moment. Then we'll provide a quick overview of FYI and FUP for those who are newer to the content. We'll talk specifically about FYI FUP in California. So, what's the size of the program statewide across communities. We will hear remarks from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's San Francisco Field Office Director. And then we'll hear about the status of FYI FUP at the federal level. So we'll talk about federal budget and related topics. And then we'll hear about some exciting new policy changes at the federal level made to the program. And we'll end with a quick sharing of resources and question and answer. So again, please submit your questions through the questions box if you can, versus the chat. Easier for us to organize if you submit them through the questions box. Thank you. All right. So I'm thrilled to be joined by four amazing individuals today. And this is just in the order that you'll hear from us today. So as I mentioned, I'm Simone Turek-Lee. I'm the Director of Housing and Economic Mobility at John Burton Advocates for Youth, joined by Chris Middleton, an Equal Justice Works Fellow at Youth Law Center, sponsored by Baker McKenzie and Salesforce, and Ed Cabrera, the San Francisco Field Office Director with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, Valerie Lynn Kane, Senior Project Manager in Housing and Economic Mobility here at John Burton Advocates for Youth with me, and Jenny Pekempner, Senior Policy Director at Youth Law Center. All right. So now I'm going to pass it over to Chris, who will give us a brief overview of FYI and FUP. And you'll sort of hear why there are two different names for this program.
All right, thanks so much, Simone. I know there are a lot of folks from different backgrounds in the room in the webinar today, so excited to give this quick overview. So the Foster Youth to Independence, or FYI initiative, is a distribution mechanism for the Family Unification Program, or FUP vouchers, that's specifically for young people. And FYI is really unique because it was a program that was developed by young people, and the program has been embedded in federal law. So young people have had the opportunity to weigh in on designing a program that is both meant to serve them, but also will assist other young people in the future. And so it's a proud legacy of the program. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide. And so FUP vouchers are a type of housing choice voucher, and if you're new to HUD world, those are commonly referred to as Section 8 vouchers, and they come from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, and they're designated for families or youth involved with the child welfare system. We can go to the next slide. And so eligibility for FYI vouchers. So a young person must be at least 18 and no more than 24 years old, which means they haven't reached their 25th birthday. They must be homeless or at risk of experiencing homelessness at the age of 16 or older. And they must have left foster care, and that includes probation supervised foster care, or they'll leave foster care within the next 90 days in accordance with the transition plan. And yes, the slides will be shared later on today, responding to the question in the chat. And you'll note that this timeline will change to 180 days or to a longer period. And we're confirming the exact timeline, but we estimate it to be around sometime in August 7th. The big debate is whether or not we're including business days or not, if we're including just business days or weekends. And so we'll have an update regarding that soon, and we can go to the next slide. And so HUD administers FYI vouchers in two main ways. First, there are competitive vouchers. And so what happens is that HUD issues a Notice of Funding Opportunity, or a NOFO, and it invites applications from eligible public housing authorities for the program and purpose described within the NOFO. And the most recent competitive award was on May 19th, 2025. However, most of the vouchers that we see in the FYI program are actually issued non-competitively. And so you'll see there the PIH notices that actually authorize this program and set the terms for the program. And so housing authorities have the opportunity to request vouchers on a rolling on-demand basis in batches as small as 1 or as large as 25. And then each housing authority is able to request up to 50 non-competitive vouchers per federal fiscal year. And if you're in a jurisdiction that has multiple housing authorities that are all working with one child welfare office, each housing authority is able to request up to 50 non-competitive vouchers per federal fiscal year. And we can go to the next slide. And so there are a lot of different partners that are considered as part of this system in FYI. So you have the Public Child Welfare Agency and the Public Housing Authority that have to collaborate through either a memo of understanding or an MOU or a letter of intent that lays out the different dynamics of the partnership. The Child Welfare Agency is responsible for referring young people and verifying their eligibility. The Child Welfare Agency is also responsible for providing or arranging for supportive services for young people, and we'll say a little bit more about that later. And then the Housing Authority has the responsibility of taking those referrals from the Child Welfare Agency and requests the voucher from HUD. And so the Housing Authority also has the responsibility to offer and facilitate the 2-year voucher extension through the Family Self-Sufficiency Program or participation conditions. Go to the next slide. And so when we talk about supportive services, you can really think about them in two different ways. You have upfront services that help young people identify housing and lease up. That can be housing navigation, financial assistance, assistance with the security deposit, or moving in. And then you have ongoing services that are really useful for maintaining housing and helping young people meet their goals. That can be help with finding employment or school, being connected to mental health services, or financial management support. And these services are all voluntary, so why it's required that the Child Welfare Agency ensures that they're available to young people. Young people don't have to accept services in order to receive a voucher. Can we go to the next slide? And then let's talk about the program length. So FYI vouchers last by default for 3 years, but can be extended for 2 additional years if the young person is participating in the Family Self-Sufficiency Program or they're fulfilling participation conditions if the Housing Authority doesn't offer FSS or it's full or has a wait list. And so FSS, or the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, has its own set of requirements. One of them is that you must execute what's called an FSS action plan, where you lay out and kind of set goals with the young person, or any person, but it's young person in this case. The young person has to be employed. It doesn't have to be at the start of the program. That's typically one of the goals that's set. The FSS also provides and coordinates services that support these goals, and it establishes an interest-bearing escrow account where increases in the voucher holder's rent from increased earned income result in a credit to the escrow account, which they receive at exit. So this is one of the main differences between how HUD rent increases traditionally work. So instead of the young person having just to contribute more to rent, that money is actually going to go into an escrow account that will collect interest during the duration of their participation in the program, which means that they'll leave the program with having saved up some money that has been earning interest during that time period, which could be a great start for a young person. And then the participation conditions usually look like education, participating in workforce development, working themselves, and there are exceptions. So if the young person has a child under 6 or cares for an incapacitated person, or they're in drug or alcohol treatment, or they have a documented medical condition that prevents them from participating in the program. And we can go to the next slide. And I saw some questions in the chat, but I'm going to respond to them at the end, but we will make sure that we get to your questions, and I'll pass it back to Simone.
Thanks, Chris. We've been tackling some of them, in the Q&A directly, but we'll also cover them live to make sure everyone sees the answer. And the ones that are more, I wouldn't say complicated, but easier to provide verbal context, we'll just wait on those till Q&A. But everyone's putting in really great questions. So please keep entering them because we want to include them in Q&A so everyone can hear the answer. All right. So we're going to talk about now specifically FYI and FUP in California, which is, I love talking about this because there's some great news here and it's really exciting. The first thing I'll note is just that we've seen a tremendous increase in the number of FYI and FUP vouchers for youth since 2021. So where we are today is there are 46 public housing authorities, which is nearly half of the housing authorities in our states, about 47%, that administer FYI or FUP for youth in partnership with a little over half of our state's counties. So 33 of our 58 counties, that is 53%. I know that was a lot of different numbers, but they're up there on the screen. And this is as of last year. This is as of October of last year. So believe it or not, even in the last, what is that? Well, we're now at like 8-9 months. There's definitely been more. So I know specifically in LA, we've seen additional housing authorities partner. So the number is now, we know, beyond 46 housing authorities. So I would say it's probably at about half at this point. And then statewide, we are seeing over 2,000 vouchers in California collectively, across all housing authorities, all communities. To be exact, back in October, it was 2,049. And again, I know we've seen an increase since that October date. So we're well above that now. And the exciting thing is this is a full 136% increase since 2021. And I'll talk a little bit about why that happened in a moment. But I think what I want to focus on right now is the last kind of box on the screen. I think it's important to understand, what does this program mean for California? What is the role it really plays? This is our most prevalent homelessness prevention program at this juncture for former foster youth. So 55% of California's housing that's coupled with supportive services, transitional, essentially, time limited housing, coupled with supportive services, 55% of that, housing stock or those housing slots, for lack of better terms, for former foster youth is made possible by FYI FUP. So the preservation of this program at the federal level is important to us if we want to continue to provide the level of support in this state that we've reached. And we know it's not nearly enough. We know there's a huge number of young people that don't have access to this program because of, there's more demand than we have capacity. But we've come so far just in a few years. And the other kind of half, the other 45% that we're looking at in terms of those housing slots are through transitional housing, which is a combination of state and county dollars. So what's important to understand here, particularly if you're here, from the legislature or someone who advocates for state budget, which I know is sticky right now, but what's good to know is that, when you think about use of state dollars and use of local dollars. You can serve youth for much less using state and local dollars if you're drawing down FYI vouchers, because the rental subsidy is covered with federal funding, right? So when we think about how to program our state or our local dollars, this is an area where we can really make a modest investment and get a large return. And that return being preventing homelessness among young adults who are leaving the foster care system. So, if you're interested in learning more about this, for a whole report with this data and also data on transitional housing, you can get it from our website using that QR code. I'll also throw it in the chat for folks for later. But this is definitely an important program. So I just wanted to underscore that as we go through the webinar. So now kind of talking a little bit about what was part of that expansion. So part of the reason California was able to more than double the number of FYI and FUP vouchers for youth that communities were accessing was due to the establishment of state funding to cover the supportive services that child welfare agencies, that Chris mentioned, that child welfare agencies must offer young people. And not only are they required to offer those services, but if you're doing this program, those services are really needed, because it is not easy to turn a voucher into housing. Particularly as someone who's 20, 22 years old, that is not easy to do. You don't have that rental history. You don't have that credit. You are often discriminated against by landlords. And we've got a really tight housing market in our state, in most counties, in many counties. So those services are important and they have to be funded. And so the existence of this program, the Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program, in combination with some good changes at the federal level, good policy changes, and some good, campaigns to spread awareness about this program, really led to an increase in our capacity. And so the Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program is administered annually by the California Department of Housing and Community Development to county child welfare agencies. The purpose in statute is to hire housing navigators to help youth ages 18 through 24 secure and maintain housing, with priority given to current and former foster youth. Now, that is the connection to FUP FYI, right? It was expanded. It's what its purpose is, right? Is to help people find housing, help them maintain housing. And so this program started as this $5 million allocation. It was expanded in 2022 to 13.7 million. Still not a huge program, right? To explicitly assist former foster youth with FYI or FUP vouchers. So where we are now is we have 13.7 million in state funding. That helps California, sort of unlock over $33 million in federal housing assistance through FYI and FUP. So that's the Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program, unique to California. And again, somewhere, if you're on and you're a state budget advocate, this is a place where we could double down and get a lot more return on investment in terms of preventing youth homelessness. All right, so Housing Navigation and Maintenance Program, just to give people a more sort of idea of what it's used for. It's commonly used for move-in costs, right? Security deposits, so that financial assistance that young people need to get, settled in their housing. Housing navigation, right? Of course, helping youth locate housing units. And then also recruiting and supporting landlords, right? Providing landlord incentives, so counties and cities, so that we have available units for youth with vouchers. And then again, a key part, providing those ongoing supportive services that Chris talked about. So now I am happy to pass it over to Ed Cabrera. He is the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development San Francisco Field Office Director, and we're thrilled to have him with us today to just speak on behalf of HUD, which is the federal department that administers these vouchers to housing authorities. So Ed, I'm handing you the mic.
Thank you, Simone. Can you hear me all right? Great. I will go ahead then. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to join you today for this important conversation. We at HUD continue to support youth as they transition out of foster care and into stable housing and adulthood. So I'm grateful for this opportunity and for your work in particular. A big thank you to Simone, of course, and to the John Burton Advocates for Youth, and to Chris and the Youth Law Center for convening us today. And of course, to all of you for participating and for your leadership and commitment to helping foster youth in communities where you live. Your leadership is particularly important during these uncertain times, arguably even more important than ever. So I'm personally grateful, and I know on behalf of HUD, our leadership continues to be grateful and committed to supporting your efforts in this space moving forward. I cover, as Simone mentioned, I represent the San Francisco Regional Office, and I cover Northern California, as do members of my team. And we want to assure you that despite uncertainties, that we at HUD continue to be committed to creating opportunities to expand support to communities that are focused on helping and supporting foster youth, as particularly those aging out of foster care. And FYI is a critical part of that. So it is active, available, continues to be have strong federal support during this administration, and we're eager to partner with you to move that forward. And in fact, as was shared in the chat, in just last month, in recognition of the Foster Care Month, HUD announced a new $25 million investment in the program, which really is a deepening of investment and will help thousands of young people aging out of foster care, again, with rental support. And coupled with the supportive services that Simone mentioned are coming from the state, really makes this a viable resource to move youth participating in the program along their path toward longer term stability. Also in a separate but related effort, HUD also recently awarded $10 million through the Family Unification Program that assists youth and families at risk of homelessness and includes over 500 new vouchers awarded to housing agencies across 4 states. There were several awards here in California. And as you know, these resources work hand in glove with FYI. As part of that, we've also rolled out new flexibilities. We want to make it more, with the program more meaningful and useful to those who participate, and make it more responsive to the needs that these clients have, based on feedback that we've gotten, I'm sure, from many of you and other local partners. These changes give youth more time to secure housing and increase access to needed wraparound services. The initiative, FYI, works best when local housing authorities, service providers, and child welfare agencies work together. So anything we can do to support that, we are all in on. And as that collaboration is key to bringing the benefits of these programs to bear with participants, especially in high cost areas like we face here in California. So I, again, want to recognize your great work and the successes here that you've had in keeping this at the fore with your community of practice, a growing number of counties that are participating in that. HUD's field and regional teams here remain committed on this issue. So when it comes to delivering technical assistance, helping you navigate the process, sharing what's working with other communities, housing authorities, because we all know at its heart, FYI is about ensuring that young people leaving foster care have a path toward building a life that's grounded in stability, safety, and opportunity. So with that, I just want to thank you again for allowing me to be with you today. And please don't hesitate to call on us. And in fact, I'm hoping we can follow this up with perhaps an FYI boot camp, if that is of interest. And if we can get all key players together, we'd be eager to support that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ed. And yes, we would love to engage HUD in an FYI boot camp. That sounds like a fun boot camp. We will talk about that offline and follow up with folks. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to pass the mic over to Valerie Lynn Kane at this point to talk a little bit about, we've talked about state. Let's talk about federal. So Valerie, please take it away.
All right, can you advance the slide, please? So as Simone mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about the status of the vouchers at the federal level as it relates to the federal budget. There's a lot of concern, uncertainty, and moving pieces related to current federal policy. The message we really want to convey today is this: there is no pause on FYI FUP vouchers at the federal level. It's important to know that the big, beautiful bill, budget reconciliation legislation that is currently in the news, does not impact HUD voucher programs. This legislation only pertains to funding for mandatory programs like Medicaid and SNAP. While the reconciliation package can be approved by a simple majority of Congress, at this point meaning only one party, the annual appropriations process requires agreement with members of the minority party to pass. The FYI FUP vouchers have consistently had bipartisan approval and are funded through these discretionary funds. What this means is the funding is tied to the annual appropriations process. The most recent appropriations agreement was signed into law back in March. This funding applies to programs through the end of the federal fiscal year, which ends September 30th. Next slide. Since 2022, FYI has been level funded at $25 million. The full program of FYI FUP is funded at $30 million. The federal fiscal year 26 budget proposals, which includes both the president's skinny budget and the more detailed agency proposals, is noted to fund FYI at $25 million again. Next slide. Now, what is in the skinny budget? A lot of items that are of great concern, as the proposals envision radically changing many domestic programs. This administration has also demonstrated that they will attempt to move funding and alter programs outside of congressional approval. Usually a president's skinny budget is understood to be dead on arrival, a bully pulpit document that outlines the administration's goals, but is not directive on how Congress allocates funding to different agencies and programs. Due to the administration's maneuvers in the last few months, it's valid to be concerned about domestic programs in a way that we have not had to be in the past. There are stories in the news this morning, actually, about the administration's pending decisions to act around Congress to reallocate previously approved funding based on their own priorities. The skinny budget proposes to transform many HUD programs. The budget proposes to combine 5 HUD programs into a single block grant distributed to states so that the states can design their own programs. The block grant would also represent an initial 43% total cut in funding for HUD rental assistance programs. As we know with block grants, their value decreases year to year, a function that would be seriously detrimental as housing prices continue to rise. Listed right after this proposal in the skinny budget is a separate line item of $25 million for housing programs for former foster youth, which would not be included in the proposed block grant. We understand this to be a continuation of the FYI voucher program. Next slide. So closely following the release of the skinny budget, there was a press release that credited the First Lady with securing the $25 million allocation for FYI. The press release noted that this program is a part of the First Lady's Be Best campaign, which has been restarted from the first Trump administration. This announcement gives us confidence that the commitment to FYI will continue, as it's clearly now included as a White House priority. So now I'll pass the baton to Jenny to talk more about some changes at the federal level to the program.
Great, thanks so much, Valerie. Next slide. So we wanted to share, and Eduardo mentioned this, that a recent notice was issued by HUD on April 9th that really is responsive to a lot that you all have probably been seeing on the ground for young people, but also for families who are utilizing Family Unification Program vouchers. And they do provide, I think, an exciting opportunity to make the programs more responsive, again, to young people, but also to what you guys have been noting, because many of you have been on the ground with youth, both helping them get through the Housing Choice Voucher applications and looking for apartments and wading through kind of all the different processes. So this notice alerts housing authorities and child welfare agencies about certain requirements that HUD is waiving. And there's two series of waivers that are in this notice that we're going to talk about. The first are mandatory waivers, and when some of these requirements that we'll discuss are waived, HUD is telling PHAs what they need to put in their place. What are the alternative requirements? And then there are a series of waivers that housing authorities have the option to take up. And we'll talk about both of them. As Chris mentioned, housing authorities have 120 days after the notice to implement the requirements and to take the options. When we just did the math with 120 days from April 9th, it gets us to August 7th. We'll let you know if it's a little longer than that if weekends aren't counted. So just want to give you guys that as that's the approximate time of when these changes would be in place. The other thing that the notice does is it does remind everyone that FYI is still alive. There are funds, as everyone's been mentioning, and it does point all of us to the notice that Chris also mentioned, the PIH notice 2023 -04, which is the notice that talks about non-competitive waivers. And again, as Chris mentioned, right now the vouchers you all would be requesting would be these non-competitive vouchers that again are available and ready to be requested by housing authorities. Next slides. And so the first waiver, and this is a mandatory waiver that I think is pretty exciting and will help with a lot of the processes of both referring and getting youth in housing without a gap. Definitely want to reiterate that you can refer youth before they leave care. You can also refer them after they leave care. So if you are referring a youth who's already left care, don't worry about this requirement. This is really a requirement about when HUD can make the referral or request for a voucher for a youth who's still in foster care. And as Chris mentioned, that formerly was 90 days, and now HUD is changing that and saying that it is 180 days. And so why that is, I think, exciting is that it does mean that the young person and you all working with a young person are allowed more of an overlap between when they're in extended foster care and when they're working their way through the Housing Choice Voucher application, and also probably more time consuming looking for a place. And it means, as the program intended, that you can have more time to have a more planned out and orderly transition plan and housing plan. And this provides youth that buffer of not having a gap, of not having housing and having to do all of these things without the support of a caseworker, their placement, and things like that. So definitely want to flag that it's a change that mostly, well, it impacts when the housing authority can make the referral to HUD, but certainly for you all from the child welfare agency standpoint, this should be able to impact, your ability to screen a little earlier, start working with the youth on the applications and looking for housing, and still have them in extended foster care or foster care with you while you do all these things. You have a kind of longer runway. And I do think that will help young people, but also help all of you guys working with youth. Next slide. And then kind of in line with the changing the timeline for HUD making the referral is two changes about, or I'm sorry, this first one is about residency preferences. That HUD is saying to housing authorities that they cannot have residency preferences for FUP and FYI voucher holders. And some of you probably have experienced this when a young person or a family was applying to a housing authority that might not be the one there in their like kind of catchment area where they currently live or where they're maybe in foster care with, but that there's good reason for them to move to that area. Maybe they want to be with family or friends, or they have employment, or they just want to be exposed to a different community. That the PHA can't say to that young person or family, you're not a current resident or you don't have ties to the community. That is not something that they can do anymore. And I know that had been a barrier for some young people who the housing authority was saying they need to already be tied to the community. And this notice is now prohibiting PHAs from doing that. So again, this gives a little more opportunity to again reduce barriers for youth utilizing vouchers and also being able to direct kind of more of their housing plan and where they want to go. Next slide. And this is the one that is connected, I think, to the first waiver, and this is a mandatory waiver that is in response to the challenges that both young people and families have had in their housing search and being able to secure housing quickly. So this does require that the PHAs extend the initial search terms and allow extensions, and we'll go to the next slide for that. That they need to allow a longer time for the initial search term, and then that PHAs have to allow for extensions of that initial search time. And when you look in detail at the notice, it also has some important reminders about, if a young person or a family is an individual with a disability, there are also other things the PHA should be doing in terms of accommodations, helping make sure that they have list of accessible apartments and things like that. So definitely a good reminder that this, of course, applies to everyone, but then those additional accommodations that could be made for an individual with a disability. And this slide provides a little more details on the very specific requirements that housing authorities have to implement as a result of this notice in terms of how they notify individuals about that initial extended search term, and then how they can request extensions. And again, trying to make it as easy as possible for someone to make this request, again, with the goal of making the time a youth has, is to secure housing. If they need more time, make it as easy as possible for them to be granted that time. And again, also reminding PHAs that whatever resources they have to help young people with finding housing, that they should do that as well as these as people are engaged in the housing search. Next slide. And then one thing that is a waiver option, and we got one question in the chat that I'll try to address here, is that currently right now young people and families who are being referred for FUP vouchers need to be put on the general housing choice voucher waiting list. They can be removed pretty easily if they are eligible for an FYI or FUP voucher and one's available or could be requested, but housing authorities need to go through that process. And this waiver option is allowing PHAs to make the choice to create separate waiting lists. So they could create their own FYI and FUP waiting list if they wanted to. And I think for, as you're working with your housing authority and maybe reminding them, informing them, or just talking with them about this notice. I think there's a lot of good reasons to have a separate waiting list. But one of the things, in this response to one of the questions in the chat, is that the notice definitely does talk about, even if you do 2 waiting lists, have a separate FYI and FUP waiting list. It talks about just making sure the housing authority addresses some of these questions about, well, if a youth is on, if you create a separate FYI FUP waiting list, when the young person goes off the FYI waiting list, for example, do you also want to keep them on the separate waiting list? And you might think, why would you do that? Well, the reason might be because, you know, the FYI vouchers are time limited, and the regular waiting list is often much longer, unfortunately, wait, and that a young person possibly could use up the time on their FYI voucher, and you might still want them on the general waiting list because they might, particularly in many markets in California, still might need some support for housing. So again, I think there's a lot of good reasons to decide to do separate waiting lists, but I think that thinking about making sure there is consideration of also leaving the young person on the general waiting list and making sure that's potentially part of the PHA's policy. And we're happy to help in talking through this, but I thought that was a really good question in the chat. And the notice does address it, that even if you have 2 waiting lists, you could have a youth go off the FYI waiting list and leave them on the regular Housing Choice Voucher to plan for the future. Next slide. And then the second waiver option is that you can, the PHA could decide that they do want to establish preferences for FYI and FUP voucher holders. I think it will depend, and this would be another one that's really like a good issue to discuss with your PHA. And it might also be like an entree to understanding more about how your PHA works, if that's something you are interested in doing. Again, I think that preferences could be really helpful for FYI and FUP voucher holders, but for some of your jurisdictions, it may not be necessary because you're not necessarily maximizing the current vouchers that you have. So that might be the first step before discussing preferences, but definitely an option. So that's the summary, I think. One more slide just to make sure. I think that gets us to the end. Yes. We're really excited about the notice and happy to take more questions. And if I know we're going through quickly, we're sharing the notice and a fact sheet on the notice. If you are interested in talking more through some of the decisions that the PHA could be making, we're happy to work with you on that.
Thank you, Jenny. We really appreciate your digging into the changes and sharing them with folks. And we are officially basically through kind of the presentation portion of the webinar. We're excited to go into Q&A. Before we do that, and this will give you a little bit of time to, if you have any additional questions, to enter them, just wanted to share, oops, that highlight should be gone. I just wanted to share 4 resources that are from JBay and YLC. And so you can get them from the QR code. There's also a link for each of them that I will put into the chat. And sorry, it looks like one of them got cut off here. But the one that's highlighted, I believe the link, Jenny and Chris, may be broken. So what we'll do is we will look into that. And that's the one, the new one. That's the one everyone's going to want. So what we'll do is we'll follow up with all the registrants on the webinar and make sure that you guys have that link later this afternoon when we send out the slides. But the one on the left is a kind of just a compilation of resources that YLC's put together related to this program. The second one is a roster of points of contact for FYI at the housing authority, the county, if there's a service provider involved. And please, if you are one of the people on those roster and it needs to be updated, please let us know, because some of those contacts get outdated, and we can only keep it as updated as you help us to. The third one, like I mentioned, is what Jenny just went through. So going through all this guidance, and I know that is probably the one people want the most. So we will get you that link. And then the last one is best practices for local administration of federal housing vouchers for former foster youth. So that's something that we put together last year, I want to say, after we did our FYI community of practice. So I'll leave that up for a little bit if people want to do the QR code thing while we compile our questions. But we're going to go into as many questions as we possibly can. And we will, if we don't get to questions, you're welcome to contact us at a later date. These are our email addresses. So if we don't get to your question, ping us, and one of us will get back to you. I'm just going to very quickly paste this last link that seemed to get cut off into the chat, and we should be good to go for questions. All right. So the first question I would love to pitch to Jenny, because I think you may have been answering this in the chat. Is it a requirement that housing authorities offer the 2-year extension through the Family Self-Sufficiency Program or participation conditions? Is that something PHAs have to offer? That's part one. Part two is, what happens if FSS, Family Self-Sufficiency Program, is eliminated at the federal level?
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Simone. So the way the regulations are written for the FSS program as it relates to FYI is it does create an option that if not all housing authorities have FSS programs, and some housing authorities that have FSS programs, they're full. And so the regulations did make provisions for that, and basically said, if there is a waiting list for FSS, the young person can enter into kind of like like a case plan, and it has specific HUD language that identifies what activity, whether it be employment, education, kind of similar to what we're familiar with for extended foster care, but definitely it's not exactly the same, but just employment, education, and other types of activities. And so the regulations make that extension then available both for if your housing authority has an FSS program and it's full with enrollees, or a housing authority doesn't have an FSS program at all. And the fact sheet that we shared, and we'll put the link in again, it gives you some templates if you're kind of not getting pushback, but you're having a hard time finding the right person. So it has templates that kind of restate what's in the regulations, just in case, because it is relatively new. And so to the second question, I mean, we're hopeful that FSS won't be eliminated, but it is right that that's proposed for elimination in the budget. And I think our hope and our advocacy would be that if the program is eliminated, that the regulations would still apply, and that our interpretation would be, so there is no FSS program, but the regulations would allow the youth to enter into an agreement for some of those activities and extend. And I don't know, Eduardo, if that's something you've contemplated, or if we don't want to wait, if we want to wait until it's actually, hopefully it is not defunded, but I think just thinking that would be my analysis. But I very much hope, because I think it's a very successful program, that it does stay funded. But if it doesn't, I think we would still advocate that the regulations would say, but youth are still eligible for the 2-year extension.
And do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I would only just say fingers crossed, and hopefully, yeah, that program is preserved, and certainly given the intent of the program, my hope is that it will be.
Great, thank you. Valerie, this question's for you. Is Melania's $25 million foster youth investment in the big, beautiful bill?
Great question. The 25 million foster youth investment, which is essentially the FYI program, the Big Beautiful Bill does not relate to that funding. The Big Beautiful Bill is what they call a budget reconciliation bill. And as far as programs are concerned, it only applies to mandatory programs like Medicaid, SNAP, different tax credits, things like that.
Thank you. All right, Chris, you want to take this one? Is California residency required for these housing programs, meaning FYI FUP?
I mean, I think, well, this program's available to young people throughout the country, so this isn't a California-only program. I think you would want to, if a young person was in foster care out of state, I know that that can be more complicated at times. And so I'm not sure if the question is like, is this a California only program? Because then the answer is like, no, this is available throughout the country. If it's like I'm working with a young person who is in foster care in a different state, and going about verifying their eligibility and how you would do that. I know from some folks, they've been able to get like a state letter confirming foster care eligibility, and then they were able to work with the local county where they were. But I think the infrastructure would look different county to county. And so would be happy for folks to reach out to my email that's currently on the screen and happy to walk you through that process.
And I think one thing for folks from the child welfare community to think about to kind of retrain our brains is, you know, when we talk about foster care, we're always county of jurisdiction, right? Like where your court case is, where your child welfare case is open, which county it's attached to. And, you know, FYI, I mean, housing vouchers, this is a different process, right? So the jurisdiction aligns with the housing authority. So I think it's a different way of thinking about things. You know, it's a big part of it is residency. So, you know, your residency, like your resident housing authority, the jurisdiction of where you live. And so I just think it's important to think about that in terms of how you go about applying for a voucher is based on really where you live. I know that's not exactly the question the person was asking, but I think it's an important distinction because we often think about county of jurisdiction versus county of residence when we're talking about foster care. The next question is, and Jenny, maybe you can take this one. Can youth use all funds from THP NMD, then THP Plus, then FYI FUP?
Yes, and we love that question because that would be, I mean, that would be a way to sequence your engagement in those programs to kind of maximize your transition runway. You don't have to do, a young person doesn't have to do it that way, and there's lots of reasons why they might make different choices between 18 and mid-20s. But yes, I mean, as long as you're not using them at the same time, and that you're kind of eligible for each program. But yes, I mean, and again, that is a way to really maximize your housing support.
I think we like to think of it as like stacking, right? You're like THP NMD, THP Plus, voucher, extension. You can get yourself into your late 20s, right? If stacked correctly, and if available. Ed, I'm going to pitch this question to you. We've got a couple of questions like this. So county reps are asking, you know, how to proceed if they're hearing from their housing authorities that they've paused housing choice vouchers altogether. So, you know, across the board in that housing authority, sort of despite FYI's continued availability, they're putting just a pause on everything. And so, and then they're citing, you know, being in shortfall as the reason. And the housing authority sort of saying, once we have funding, we'll resume. Do you have thoughts on how these stakeholders should proceed? Is there any action they could take? Is it a waiting game? Sort of what do you suggest there?
Yes, sure, Simone. Yeah, and shortfall for housing authorities is a real concern, one that's made more acute by the current climate. So I think that has led housing authorities to be more conservative as a result, maybe in some respects a little too conservative. So what I will hope we can do is get all, you know, I mentioned the boot camp earlier, is get all of these folks in the room to start sharing how we can partner to address some of these concerns. So it would, of course, include HUD in the room and our Office of Public Housing in particular, as they are key to explaining the level of flexibilities that housing authorities will have with regard to this program. I would also say to stay in touch with us, and certainly you're welcome to reach out to me. Trevor Auser is our public housing director here in San Francisco, but we also have Marcy Vega, who's our regional public housing leader, and they will be a part of this. We're also going to be convening with housing authorities later this week, so I think this will be the latest opportunity to address any issues, misconceptions they may have with regard to this program. So again, our goal here is to get more housing authorities to go all in. And if there are issues with making the program more available and getting youth leased up, we want to address those. And if we have to do a sort of a boot camp style convening to do that, let's do it. I think it'd be great to, we'd be happy to host it here at HUD.
Thank you. Definitely. So, and sort of on a similar note, it's a good segue. Someone said, is there someone at JBay or other orgs that would mentor those who want to advocate for creating or expanding the use of FUP vouchers in counties where they are not being utilized? So I can answer on behalf of JBay. Absolutely. We're happy to do that. Reach out to me or Valerie and let's talk. And I'll let Jenny or Chris or Ed respond if they're willing to jump into, but my guess is yes.
Yes, for sure.
Great. And I think Ed just offered a boot camp. So we'll invite your housing authorities to that boot camp. So so email us all. We're all happy to help. Another question is, so we get this question a lot, and I'm wondering if there's, maybe Jenny, if you want to answer this since you've been in the weeds on the changes, but so once the youth moves into the unit, so let's say they apply for a voucher, they're 6 or 3 months out from foster care, once that new policy takes effect, and they move into their unit, they lease up, but they're still technically in extended foster care. Is the youth going to receive both AB 12 financial supports? So say they, were in a SILP, a supervised independent living placement, and they were receiving that monthly check. Where does that intersection, what happens there? When do you start, being in your subsidized housing unit for FYI and stop receiving your SILP payment, for example? When do you when do you exit care? Is it after that lease up, or how does that work?
Yeah, and this might be something where talking through some case examples might be helpful for a later, like maybe to add to the FAQ, because I'm interpreting the 180 days as similar to the 90, that between that time, it is okay to be in extended foster care and whatever comes with that during that time. And that if you were receiving any payments as a result of being extending foster care, they wouldn't count as income just during that period, that 180 days. But I do think we'd need confirmation about that. I mean, I think that was always the intention of the 90 days, that you do allow a very limited time for overlap. There's kind of a similar overlap in applying for SSI benefits, where kind of wait to do the income till after the young person leaves care. So I don't know, Ed, if that's a question you can answer now, or if you feel like that needs to be something that's in an enhanced FAQ, or the FAQ hasn't been amended since this notice.
Right. Yeah, certainly the latter. I think we'd have to update that and maybe even connect you, Jenny, to our subject matter expert on the program.
Well, I wish we had like 15 more minutes to go through all these. There's such good questions, but again, if we didn't get to your question, please send them to us. Maybe we can figure out a way to update some sort of Q&A or FAQ with some of these, but because some of these are really, really good. But yeah, and I know there was one question about how do you know if your community does this? look on the roster that we put a link to. And if you're not on there, again, reach out and we're happy to help try to advocate for this in your community. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you to our presenters, and we'll be in touch about future FYI activities that we maybe could all collaborate on. Have a great rest of the week, and everyone stay safe and healthy. Bye-bye.